The Sherlock Holmes Advent Calendar. The Redeemer's Coming. By Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin. Narrated by Peter Silverleaf. 15. The Veneration of the Virgin. Holmes was very surprised by my new findings. He swayed back and forth a little with his whole body, apparently processing the information in that way. "So that means," he summed up, "Simon Taylor came to the Abbey for the only purpose to search for the whereabouts of his missing sister. A fact of the highest interest. And at last a good reason to enter a convent," I added. "He was here for an investigation," Holmes continued. "He used his new identity as Brother Emmanuel to gain the trust of the friars and access to all areas of the building. He could then move like a fish in the water, but of course he did not find Maria. Brother Francis would have recognized the portrait if Simon's sister had been there in the course of pastoral care or other charitable activities, but he had already denied it when he showed it to him." "It is quite strange," I said, "that coincidentally 2 young women disappear in this environment within a short time. First Maria Taylor, and soon after that the kitchen help of the Abbey." Holmes shook his head. "There are no coincidences," he said firmly, "and still I don't see the connection between the 2 girls, or at least not yet." "And there's another question that comes up," I added. "If Brother Emmanuel couldn't find his sister here, in contrast to what the knife grinder said, why did he stay anyway? And what did he find instead that led to his assassination? It's all very confusing." "A fact," Holmes said, "but there has to be a connection. Just because Maria Taylor was not here when her brother arrived does not mean that none of the monks could still know anything about her whereabouts or have any connection to her future fate. I think we should keep our new insights for the time being to ourselves. No word about it. No one." "Not even Lestrade either?" I asked. "Not even Lestrade," Holmes replied sternly. "He would be the first to reveal his knowledge in the wrong place and at the wrong time, thereby warning the perpetrator. We finally have a certain advantage, and we shall play our hand close to our chest." "Well," I asked, demanding, "was there something else you wanted to tell me?" Holmes gave me a confused look and said, "What would that be?" "How about, for example, a few good words for my performance?" I suggested. "After all, I have successfully carried on with our investigation, even though I had to face difficult and dangerous conditions." "Oh, Watson," Holmes replied, "are you really that insecure?" I was stunned. "Holmes," I shouted indignantly, "do you know what I took upon myself? I almost died out there in the snowstorm." "But you're still alive," Holmes said soberly. "Only by a heartbeat," I declared loudly, and was still upset. "It took a mule to save me at the last second." "So what are you complaining about?" asked Holmes. I took a deep breath and switched to a calmer tone. "Dear friend," I said slowly, "would my passing have had no meaning at all for you?" "But of course," Holmes said, "I would have been inconsolable." "Thank you," I replied, sadly satisfied. I gave up and got up. "Well, Holmes," I tried to end the conversation, "after I have delivered all the information to you properly, you can now renounce my existential presence accordingly." "What are you going to do?" asked Holmes, though he undoubtedly did not really care. "I will now wait for the abbot and report my return," I said. "I have to tell him about how I left his best mule in Teddington, and that the Franciscan will have to live without his workforce." "Oh, it certainly doesn't matter," Holmes replied unmoved. "They now have Lestrade instead. Certainly a worthy replacement." A fair exchange, I thought as well, but I refused to say it out loud. I nodded to Holmes as a temporary goodbye and made my way to Brother Francis's office. On the way there I met Brother Jorge, the only Spanish monk of the monastery on the walk. Again, as a returnee, I was greeted kindly. "Bienvenido, Fray Juan," said Brother Jorge with a smile, and I thanked him for bringing forth all my Spanish skills. However, I began to wonder whether the monks had unspokenly expected me to die on the way to Teddington and not return. When I entered the ministry, I found both the abbot and the vicar there. Dr. Watson, Brother Francis exclaimed immediately, I have already been told of your arrival. I am pleased that you are back safely. We have missed you. Yes, I replied. Holmes has already assured me of that, very credibly, might I add. The abbot skipped a remark and asked, And what did you find out? I hope the arduous journey was worth it? I thought of Holmes's admonition not to reveal too much of our actual knowledge, so I replied, I was able to shed some light on Brother Emmanuel's dark past. He really was from Teddington. Apparently he had suffered several strokes of fate and losses. We think this is why he entered the order. At least that's the information that Reverend Blake was able to give me. Ah, the Reverend, Brother Francis said with a smile across his face. Unfortunately, I haven't seen him for a long time. It's a pity, because he's a good man and an excellent interlocutor. He is an Anglican priest, the vicar grumbled. We should not be talking to leaders of the false, divisive Protestant faith, which exists in England only for reasons of systematic fornication and seemingly legalized adultery in the royal family. No. The abbot urged his deputy to be cautious. Don't you think, brother, that it's time to let the religious wars rest? There may be differences of opinion, but ultimately faith in God and his Son, Jesus Christ, unites us. And what about Virgin Mary? Said Brother Peter. The Anglican dissenters oppose the Council of Ephesus. They outrageously disregard the teachings of the Immaculate Conception and the physical reception of Mary into heaven. They are barbaric heretics waiting for nothing but deserved damnation. No forgiveness, no redemption. I cleared my throat, and the vicar added, Sorry, people in this room, of course, excluded. Your enthusiasm for the devotion to Mary in honor, the abbot calmly said, but we do not want to condemn our brothers and sisters who have fallen astray. We want to lead them back on the right track, and this will only be possible through respect, conversation, and persuasion. As much as I am interested in Christian theology, I interjected, and although I very much welcome the fact that we Anglican heretics are no longer condemned to die at the stake, please accept my apologies, gentlemen, for we still have 2 murder cases to investigate. However, you can continue the discussion about the position of the Virgin Mary in the correct Christian faith in the near future with Reverend Blake personally, because he has announced an early visit here in the monastery. I can do without that, the vicar stated firmly. You are free to do so, Brother Peter, I replied, but the visit is also about the repatriation of your good mule, Harry, which I unfortunately had to leave temporarily in the care of the Reverend. Maybe you think Harry is a more appropriate interlocutor for your purposes. The abbot laughed, and the vicar felt successfully insulted. This is unacceptable, he growled, storming out of the room. After he slammed the door closed, Brother Francis said, You have to accept my apologies for Brother Peter. He has a very strong opinion on some issues, but this is only an expression of his deep faith and his consistent devotion to Virgin Mary. In the meantime, however, I too had calmed down and replied, I must apologize for the remark with the mule, and I will do so next time I see Brother Peter. However, since we are already talking about shady jokes, there is one thing I meant to ask you all along. You didn't name Harry after King Henry VIII, right? Once again the abbot had to laugh, but then he put his right index finger on his closed lips and refused to testify. But that was a good enough reason to answer me. I returned to Holmes, and again I found him still studying that chronicle. Apparently he found a certain interest in the history of the Abbey. Done for now, I proclaimed as I sat down at the table again. The abbot was informed that the mule would be transferred here with a slight delay. Well, Holmes muttered, otherwise we might not have been able to get Lestrade back. Is he still shoveling snow? I asked. Not at all, Holmes replied. Apparently he has since been sent to the pigsty for the purpose of feeding and cleaning out the stables. You have to remember, dear Watson, that the friars must compensate for the loss of 2 brothers and thus 2 valuable workers. Holmes recklessly offering the inspector's workforce to the convent seemed a little too much for me. But I was wary of saying anything about that, because I feared that Holmes would probably suggest that I temporarily exonerate Lestrade. Holmes's thought already ran free. "These are remarkably strange people, these Catholics," he began, tapping a page in the Chronicle. "Did you know that this abbey has an extensive collection of sacred relics?" "Relics?" I repeated questioningly while frowning. "They are the earthly remains of saints or martyrs," Holmes said, "possibly also items in their possessions or items they were more or less in contact with. They are being worshipped at the altar and are said to fulfill miracles and heal." "Sounds more like a pagan custom to me," I said. "In fact, the Protestant churches characterize Catholic relic worship as unbiblical and a kind of idolism," Holmes continued. "In addition, it is also somewhat macabre. Imagine what they have in their collection: bone fragments of John the Baptist, arrowheads from the damaged body of St. Severin, a whiskey glass of St. Patrick, a hair curl of St. Catherine, a fingertip of Bishop Polycarp of Smyrna, a sandal of St. Francis of Assisi, a nail from the cross to which the Romans nailed the King of the Jews, and to top it all off, a small bottle of Jesus' blood. And I am not even close to being done listing things." I smiled at this absurd collection of objects, the mere procurement of which would, of course, have been completely impossible. How should these relics have come into the possession of the monastery? How would they have survived the centuries, even millennia? Undoubtedly, the old relics, especially those from the Holy Land, had to be counterfeits, through whose acquisition or production the respective church location wanted to accumulate their merit within Catholic society. The Redeemer's Abbey was certainly not exempt from a practice like that. "Still," I replied for fun, "truly a colossal achievement to collect all these things, and more. It is impossible to imagine what else we could find when we examine the secret rooms of the Abbey. Who knows, maybe they hid the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail in these walls."